Okay, let's just dive right into this explainer. Now, we are going to do something today that most retail investors, and frankly, even some seasoned finance professionals, rarely ever do. We are going to read the manual. You see, every single initial public offering, every IPO that hits the market, begins its life with one foundational, absolute beast of a document. It's called the Draft Red Herring Prospectus, or the DRHP for short. This document is literally the ultimate source of truth for a company. It is packed with hundreds of pages of raw data, operational insights, risks, and hard market realities. But because it is so incredibly dense and, let's be honest, pretty intimidating, it usually just goes completely unread by the public. Well, that changes today. In this explainer, we are going to act as your dedicated research analysts. We are going to translate this massive, heavy document into a dynamic, visual, and easy-to-understand breakdown. And we are starting right at the foundation, looking at the core business fundamentals of an honestly fascinating company, Indo-MIM Limited.
Right off the bat, I want to show you this quote. This is pulled directly from the early pages of their DRHP, and what's really interesting about it is how it establishes Indo-MIM's dominant position literally out of the gate. Quote, largest manufacturer globally of precision engineering components using MIM technology. They are not just some local player trying to find their footing or slowly expand. No, according to the Frost & Sullivan industry report, which was specifically commissioned for this prospectus, Indo-MIM is the #1 manufacturer in the entire world for these specific precision engineering components. And they haven't just arrived here, they've held this global leadership position for the last 5 years straight. But what does that actually mean in the real world? Well, before we can even begin to look at their financial statements or debate their IPO offer price or look at valuation multiples, we have to actually understand the physical reality of what they build, exactly how they build it, and why it matters so much to the global supply chain.
So, here is our roadmap. Today's agenda covers 5 key pillars. First, the Indo-MIM IPO breakdown. Second, we'll answer what is MIM technology. Third, we'll look at their industries and global reach. Fourth, the competitive landscape. And finally, the importance of context. Let's get into it.
Section 1. The Indo-MIM IPO, a business breakdown.
You know, whenever a company files for an IPO, the market immediately starts buzzing. Everyone wants to talk about gray market premiums, listing gains, and PE ratios. It is a frenzy. But as a focused learner, you know that numbers without business context are totally meaningless. A business isn't just a spreadsheet. It's a living, breathing ecosystem of factories, supply chains, and specific technologies. So, before we can even attempt to understand Indo-MIM's competitive edge, we must answer the single most fundamental question that drives their entire operation. What exactly is metal injection molding, or MIM? Now, if you're a finance student or an aspiring investment banker or just a retail investor, you probably don't have an advanced mechanical engineering background. And hey, that is perfectly fine. We're going to break this complex industrial process down into incredibly simple, digestible concepts so you fully grasp the actual engine driving this company.
Moving to Section 2. What is MIM technology? Okay, I want you to imagine trying to create a tiny, incredibly intricate metal gear. Something super precise that you might find inside a luxury watch or a highly calibrated surgical instrument. Now, imagine trying to make that gear by carving it out of a solid, heavy block of steel. It would be insanely expensive, it would take forever, and you'd waste a ton of metal in the process. Metal injection molding completely solves this problem. It is a brilliant manufacturing innovation that essentially takes the amazing design flexibility of plastic injection molding, but combines it with the raw strength and durability of high-grade metals. Honestly, think of it a lot like high-tech baking, but for high-strength steel. Here is how the DWHP breaks it down. First, you take a superfine metal powder, like stainless steel or titanium, and you mix it with a thermoplastic binder. This binder is basically just a temporary processing glue. When you mix them together, they create what's called a feedstock. The DWHP actually compares the consistency of this feedstock to thick ice cream. So you take this metal ice cream and you inject it under extreme high pressure into a mold cavity. What pops out is a fragile piece they call a green part. Next comes debinding, where that plastic binder is carefully melted or chemically removed, leaving behind a brown part. Finally, we hit the sintering stage. This is the baking part. The component is blasted in a high-temperature furnace, any tiny bit of remaining binder burns off, and those microscopic metal particles physically fuse together. The part shrinks by about 20%, but it densifies into a solid, heavy metal component that is up to 99% as dense as traditionally forged steel. And here is a crucial detail from the DWHP. What gives Indo-MIM a massive competitive edge is that they formulate their own feedstock from scratch in-house. The industry calls this the elemental way, and it gives them absolute, total control over the quality of the final product.
And this right here brilliantly illustrates the end result. Take a look at these images. These are the highly intricate, geometrically complex components that MIM produces. We are talking about custom parts with internal threads, bizarre undercuts, tiny gear teeth, cross holes, and complex grooves. If you tried to make these with traditional cutting tools, it would require multiple, super expensive secondary operations on different machines. But MIM can create these wild, multi-component parts from a single piece and a single mold. They can pump out parts weighing as incredibly little as 15 grams, and they can do it with typical tolerances of just plus or minus 0.3 to 0.5%. It is quite literally the ultimate solution for industrial miniaturization and massive manufacturing complexity.
Now, let's put this into perspective with some hard numbers. When we compare MIM directly against traditional machining and stamping, the data in the DRHP reveals exactly why this technology is aggressively taking over the global supply chain. Look at this table. Traditional stamping or machining is a subtractive process. You start with a big block and you cut away what you don't need. This generates massive waste. Sometimes 50% to 90% of the raw material is just swept off the floor and thrown away as scrap. Because MIM is what they call a near-net-shaped technology, it only uses the precise, exact amount of material required for the final part. The wastage is shockingly low. We are talking about material waste as low as 3% or sometimes even lower. That is absolutely wild. Furthermore, the DRHP notes that MIM is 30 to 50% more cost-effective than traditional machining for these complex parts. Sure, that initial mold you have to build might be expensive to design up front, but once it is made, you can pump out millions of identical, high-precision metal parts with basically zero material waste. It's a real game-changer for unit economics.
Section 3. Industries and Global Reach.
Any analyst will tell you that a manufacturing business is only as strong and stable as its customer base, and Indo-MIM has systematically embedded itself into some of the most critical, highly demanding industries on the planet. According to the DRHP, there are 5 major sectors currently driving the global MIM industry. First up is consumer goods, which makes up about 35% of the global market. Think wearable tech, smartwatches, and smartphone components that require lightweight, highly durable, and tiny parts. Next is medical devices at 30%. In this sector, precision is literally a matter of life and death, with MIM being used heavily for surgical instruments and joint replacements. Then we have automotive at 17%, where MIM parts are actively replacing much heavier cast parts to help improve vehicle fuel efficiency. Finally, defense and aerospace make up 8% each, utilizing MIM for incredibly tough firearm components and turbine vanes. So why does this matter to you as a researcher? Because by diversifying across these 5 rigorous, entirely different sectors, Indo-MIM heavily insulates itself. They are protected from sudden economic downturns in any single market.
And then there's this number, 15. This single number perfectly highlights their massive operational scale. As of the date of the DRHP, Indo-MIM doesn't just have 1 or 2 factories. They operate 15 distinct manufacturing facilities worldwide. They have 6 facilities right here in India, including their massive main plants in Hoskote and Dodabalapur in Bengaluru. And get this, the Dodabalapur plant actually houses 3 of the world's largest continuous furnaces used in the entire MIM industry. But they don't just stop in India. They have a massive international footprint as well, with 6 facilities in the United States, 2 facilities in the United Kingdom that are heavily focused on cutting-edge 3D printing, and 1 facility in Mexico. Across this sprawling footprint, they employ over 4,300 people and operate over 200 individual molding machines. The physical scale of this operation is just staggering. Because of that extensive global footprint, Indo-MIM is able to directly supply products to customers in more than 50 countries globally. But what is absolutely crucial for us to understand here is the strategic intent behind this geographic spread. The DRHP emphasizes a vital industry concept called nearshoring. By establishing physical manufacturing capacity closer to their actual customer base in North America and Europe, they can drastically reduce global supply chain risks, they can respond to customer needs much faster, and they can significantly cut down on delivery lead times. In fact, their business model is overwhelmingly export-driven. The DRHP shows that exports account for approximately 88% and 90% of their total revenue from operations over the last 3 fiscal years. Let that sink in. They are an Indian manufacturing powerhouse, but they are catering almost entirely to the global stage.
Section 4. The competitive landscape. So, to truly gauge a company's strength, we have to look at the battlefield they're fighting on, right? The global MIM market was valued at an estimated $3.7 billion in 2024. Now, traditionally, this is a space that sees really strong concentration from massive Chinese manufacturers who supply all those domestic consumer electronics giants. But when we look at the top global players by actual revenue, Indo-MIM sits at the very top of the mountain.
In fiscal 2025, Indo-MIM generated $262 million in MIM revenue alone. As this chart visually proves, this significantly outpaces their closest Chinese competitors. You've got Jiangzhou Jian sitting at $185 million and CN Innovation at $178 million. Indo-MIM is undeniably the #1 player globally, which really proves that their focus on end-to-end solutions and that global nearshoring strategy we just talked about is actively winning major OEM contracts over their international rivals.
However, as we see right here on this donut chart, there is a catch. Indo-MIM holds a 7% market share. Now, holding 7% as the absolute global leader indicates something very specific to an equity research analyst. This is a highly fragmented industry. The top 15 manufacturers combined only hold about 40% to 45% of the total global market demand. That remaining 83.2% you see sitting outside the top 3, that is scattered among hundreds of smaller regional players. But the DRHP notes a growing, shifting trend. Global OEMs are increasingly looking to consolidate their supplier base. They want to work with fewer, larger, and much more reliable partners. With the world's largest installed capacity, Indo-MIM is uniquely positioned to capture this shifting demand and act as a major consolidator in the industry going forward.
Furthermore, the company enjoys an incredibly strong economic moat. In business, a moat is essentially what protects your castle from invading competitors. The DRHP explicitly details the substantial barriers to entry in this precision components manufacturing industry, and they are brutal. First, the capital expenditure is really high. Just the initial tooling costs to build a single custom mold can range anywhere from $15,000 to $75,000. That means this process is really only economical for massive high-volume orders. But the real moat? The real moat is the onboarding process. To become an approved supplier for a global automotive, medical, or aerospace OEM, a manufacturer has to undergo a grueling barrage of audits, intense testing, and trial runs that can take literally 2 to 3 years to complete. Think about that. Once an OEM spends 3 whole years validating a supplier like Indo-MIM and they invest tens of thousands of dollars in custom tooling, they are highly unlikely to suddenly switch to an unproven, cheaper competitor just to save a few pennies. This creates incredible customer stickiness and long-term revenue visibility for Indo-MIM.
Section 5. The importance of context.
Okay, we've spent this entire explainer talking about metal powders, continuous furnaces, market share, and economic moats, and we haven't looked at a single balance sheet or profit and loss statement yet. Why did we do that? Well, what you absolutely must take away from this episode is that business context is the mandatory first step of any proper fundamental analysis. Knowing a company's technological edge, understanding their market share, and visualizing their actual operational scale is an absolutely required foundation before you ever try to evaluate their financial statements or judge their offer price. Because look, if you just look at a spreadsheet, all you see is revenue numbers going up or down. It's just math. But because you now understand the intricate MIM process, you understand the multi-year OEM onboarding cycle, and you understand the fragmented nature of a $3.7 billion market, you actually understand why those revenue numbers behave the way they do. You understand the physical reality that is generating the cash flow. At the end of the day, you simply cannot properly value a business if you don't first understand how it actually operates in the real world.
So, armed with a structural understanding of Indo-MIM, you are now perfectly positioned to start breaking down the actual numbers in your own research journey. This concludes our foundational explainer of the business. We have firmly established the unique manufacturing technology, their massive 50-country global footprint, and their commanding market lead over their international peers. In the next episode, we will begin with the offer summary and understand exactly what Indo-MIM is bringing to the public markets, and we'll start applying this business knowledge directly to the financials backing it up. The business model is proven, but the ultimate question remains: what does the actual offer look like? Until then, keep reading the documents and stay focused.